It started when I noticed that certain patients were receiving vitamins that weren't in our hospital pharmacy. The injections came from an unmarked vial, and only Dr. Reeves administered them. When I tested one of those vials, I discovered it contained an experimental cancer drug that was killing patients faster than their actual disease. My name is Nicole Jackson, and I've been an oncology nurse at Memorial Cancer Center for 14 years. In that time, I've watched thousands of patients fight cancer with every weapon modern medicine could provide. I've seen miraculous recoveries and heartbreaking losses, but I've always believed that every patient deserved honest, ethical treatment based on their best interests. What I discovered in Ward 7 shattered that faith and revealed a conspiracy so twisted that it turned our hospital into a secret laboratory where vulnerable cancer patients were unknowing test subjects in experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. This is the story of how suspicious observations about unmarked medications led to the exposure of illegal human experimentation that had been killing patients for profit while their families believed they were receiving the best possible care. Memorial Cancer Center's Ward 7 housed our most critically ill oncology patients, those fighting advanced cancers who needed intensive monitoring and aggressive treatment protocols. As the senior black nurse on the ward, I developed relationships with patients and families who were facing the most difficult battle of their lives. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply meaningful. Every day brought opportunities to provide comfort, advocate for patients, and sometimes witness the kind of medical miracles that made all the heartbreak worthwhile. Dr. Marcus Reeves had joined our oncology team 6 months earlier as a research physician specializing in experimental cancer treatments. His credentials were impressive: fellowship at Johns Hopkins, publications in major medical journals, and experience with cutting-edge therapies that offered hope to patients with otherwise terminal diagnoses. Initially, I was excited to work with Dr. Reeves. Experimental treatments represented hope for patients who'd exhausted standard options, and his research background suggested he might bring new opportunities to our ward. But over the weeks, I began noticing patterns in Dr. Reeves's patient care that didn't match standard oncology protocols. Mrs. Eleanor Peterson was my first concern. At 67, she was fighting stage 3 lung cancer with a treatment plan that included chemotherapy, radiation, and supportive care. Her prognosis was serious but not hopeless, and she'd been responding well to standard treatments. When Dr. Reeves took over her care, he added what he called enhanced vitamin therapy to her regimen. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm going to add some specialized vitamins to your treatment," Dr. Reeves explained during rounds. "These supplements will help boost your immune system and improve your body's response to chemotherapy." The vitamins came in unmarked vials that Dr. Reeves administered personally. When I asked about them, his explanation was vague and dismissive. "They're a specialized formulation from our research pharmacy," he said, "not something that would be familiar to general nursing staff." I found his condescending tone troubling, but more concerning was that these vitamins weren't documented in our pharmacy system. Every medication administered to patients was supposed to be tracked through our computerized system, but Dr. Reeves's special vitamins had no record of origin, composition, or approval. Over the following weeks, I noticed that Dr. Reeves was administering his mystery vitamins to 6 different patients in Ward 7. All were fighting advanced cancers, all were vulnerable and desperate for any treatment that might help, and all began showing unusual symptoms after receiving the injections. Mrs. Peterson, who had been stable and responding well to treatment, suddenly developed severe nausea, neurological symptoms, and blood abnormalities that didn't match her cancer type or standard treatment side effects. Mr. James Wilson, a 54-year-old with prostate cancer, experienced similar symptoms after receiving Dr. Reeves's vitamins. His condition deteriorated rapidly, with organ failure that seemed unrelated to his original cancer diagnosis. Most disturbing was 42-year-old Maria Santos, a single mother fighting breast cancer. She'd been doing well with conventional treatment when Dr. Reeves added her to his vitamin program. Within 2 weeks, she was experiencing seizures and liver failure that baffled other oncologists. "I don't understand what's happening," Dr. Patricia Chen, our head of oncology, confided to me during Maria's crisis. "Her symptoms don't match breast cancer progression or any known chemotherapy side effects. I wanted to mention Dr. Reeves's experimental vitamins, but I needed more evidence before making accusations against a physician. Instead, I began documenting everything I observed about his unconventional treatments. What I discovered was that patients receiving Dr. Reeves' vitamins were dying at twice the rate of similar patients receiving standard care. Their deaths were being attributed to aggressive cancer progression or treatment-resistant disease, but their symptoms suggested something else entirely. I decided to investigate Dr. Reeves's mystery vitamins using skills I'd learned in my nursing education and previous experience working with clinical research protocols. During one of Dr. Reeves's vitamin administrations, I discreetly collected a small sample from the vial he was using. The liquid was clear and odorless, giving no obvious clues about its composition. Using contacts from my previous work with legitimate clinical trials, I arranged to have the sample analysed by an independent laboratory. What they found confirmed my worst fears. The vitamin contained an experimental cancer drug called XR47, which was in early-stage testing and had never been approved for human use. According to the lab report, XR47 was known to cause severe neurological damage, organ failure, and death in animal testing subjects. Dr. Reeves was administering a potentially lethal experimental drug to cancer patients without their knowledge or consent. But the discovery raised even more disturbing questions. How was Dr. Reeves obtaining experimental drugs? Who was authorizing these treatments? And most importantly, how many patients had been harmed by his illegal experimentation? I needed to gather more evidence before reporting what I'd discovered, but I also needed to protect current patients from further harm. My investigation led me to explore areas of the hospital I'd never accessed before. Dr. Reeves spent significant time in the research wing, which housed laboratories and offices used by physicians conducting clinical studies. Using my hospital access card, I explored the research wing during evening hours when most staff had gone home. What I found in Laboratory 7B exceeded my worst fears. The lab contained dozens of vials labelled with codes rather than drug names, detailed charts tracking patient responses to various experimental treatments, and computer files documenting what appeared to be systematic human experimentation. According to the files, Dr. Reeves wasn't working alone. He was part of a network that included researchers from pharmaceutical companies who were using our cancer patients as test subjects for drugs that hadn't completed animal trials. The patients' medical records were coded to hide their participation in experiments. Their families believed they were receiving standard cancer treatment when they were actually being used as human guinea pigs for potentially deadly drugs. Most shocking were the financial records showing that Dr. Reeves was being paid substantial fees for each patient enrolled in experimental protocols. The pharmaceutical companies were essentially buying access to human test subjects through our hospital. I photographed everything I could find, knowing that this evidence would be crucial for exposing the conspiracy and protecting future patients. As I reviewed Dr. Reeves's files, the full scope of his illegal experimentation became clear. Over 6 months, he'd used 23 cancer patients as test subjects for various experimental drugs, many of which had proven toxic or lethal in animal studies. The files contained detailed records of patient responses, side effects, and outcomes, documented with the clinical detachment of someone conducting laboratory experiments rather than treating human beings. Mrs. Peterson's file showed that she'd been receiving XR47 for 3 weeks. The drug was causing the neurological symptoms and organ damage that were rapidly destroying her health. According to Dr. Reeves's notes, these effects were expected outcomes that provided valuable data about the drug's toxicity in humans. Mr. Wilson had been given a different experimental drug that was destroying his liver and kidneys. His file noted that the organ failure was progressing as anticipated based on animal studies. Maria Santos's case was perhaps the most heartbreaking. She'd been enrolled in a trial testing 3 different experimental drugs simultaneously. The combination was causing the seizures and multiple organ failure that were threatening her life. Dr. Reeves's notes indicated that the drug combination was exploratory and had never been tested together in any species. These weren't medical treatments, they were systematic poisoning of vulnerable patients who trusted their doctor to help them fight cancer. Armed with evidence of Dr. Reeves' illegal experimentation, I faced a difficult decision about how to proceed. Reporting him to hospital administration might result in a cover-up if other officials were involved. But continuing to allow him to experiment on patients was unconscionable. I decided to confront Dr. Reeves directly while recording the conversation, hoping to get him to admit to his crimes. The opportunity came when Maria Santos took a turn for the worse and was transferred to intensive care. Dr. Reeves was adjusting her treatment, claiming that her deterioration was due to aggressive cancer progression. Dr. Reeves, Maria's symptoms don't match breast cancer progression. Her liver failure and seizures suggest drug toxicity. He looked at me with barely concealed annoyance. Nurse Jackson, I appreciate your concern, but complex oncology cases require expertise beyond nursing knowledge. What about the experimental drugs you've been giving her? Could they be causing these symptoms? Dr. Reeves's expression changed completely. I don't know what you're talking about. The vitamins that aren't in our pharmacy system, the unmarked vials, the treatments that only you administer. You're making serious accusations without understanding the medical complexities involved. I pulled out my phone and showed him the lab analysis of his vitamin sample. This shows XR47, an experimental cancer drug that's never been approved for human use. You've been giving this to Mrs. Peterson for weeks. Dr. Reeves stared at the lab report, realizing that his secret had been exposed. Where did you get this? I had it tested because patients were dying from symptoms that didn't match their diseases. How many people have you killed with your experiments? I'm trying to find cures for cancer. Sometimes that requires taking risks that conventional medicine won't take. Taking risks with other people's lives without their knowledge or consent, that's not medicine, it's murder. Dr. Reeves's confession revealed the full scope of his illegal research operation. He'd been recruited by pharmaceutical companies who needed human test subjects for drugs that were too dangerous for standard clinical trials. These patients are dying anyway, he said, trying to justify his actions. At least this way their deaths contribute to medical knowledge that could save future lives. They're not dying anyway. Maria Santos was responding well to treatment before you started poisoning her with experimental drugs. The pharmaceutical companies are paying for research that could revolutionize cancer treatment. We're on the verge of breakthroughs that could save millions of lives, built on the bodies of patients who trusted you to help them, not use them as laboratory animals. Dr. Reeves explained how the operation worked. Pharmaceutical companies identified drugs that were too toxic for standard testing but showed promise in laboratory studies. They paid doctors like him to secretly administer these drugs to terminal patients, gathering human data without the oversight and consent requirements of legitimate clinical trials. The patients would die from cancer anyway, he repeated. This way their deaths serve a purpose. Maria Santos isn't terminal. Mrs. Peterson was responding to treatment. Mr. Wilson had a good prognosis. You've been shortening their lives and causing unnecessary suffering for research data. The cold calculation in Dr. Reeves's justification was perhaps more horrifying than the illegal experimentation itself. He'd convinced himself that using vulnerable patients as test subjects was morally acceptable because he was advancing medical science. I knew that Dr. Reeves's confession alone wouldn't be enough to stop his operation or protect other patients. I needed comprehensive evidence that would expose the entire network and lead to criminal charges. Over the next week, I systematically gathered documentation of Dr. Reeves's illegal research while continuing to provide care for his victims. I copied patient files, photographed drug vials, and recorded conversations that revealed the scope of his experimentation. Most importantly, I contacted the families of affected patients and explained what had really happened to their loved ones. They deserved to know that their family members hadn't died from cancer progression, but from experimental drugs administered without consent. Mrs. Peterson's daughter was devastated. Are you telling me that my mother is dying because a doctor was using her as a test subject? I'm telling you that her symptoms are caused by an experimental drug that was never approved for human use. Her cancer was treatable, but the drug Dr. Reeves gave her is causing organ failure. Maria Santos's sister was equally horrified. Maria was getting better. She was planning to go back to work. You're saying this doctor poisoned her. The drugs he's been giving her are causing the seizures and liver failure. Without those drugs, she would likely have recovered from her cancer treatment. The family's anger and grief provided additional motivation for exposing Dr. Reeves's crimes. Their loved ones had trusted the medical system to help them fight cancer, not to use them as unwilling test subjects in deadly experiments. I reported Dr. Reeves's illegal experimentation to multiple authorities simultaneously: the hospital's ethics board, the state medical board, the FDA, and the FBI's healthcare fraud unit. The investigation that followed revealed that Dr. Reeves was part of a national network of physicians conducting illegal human experiments for pharmaceutical companies. The network had been operating for over 2 years, using vulnerable patients in hospitals across the country as test subjects for drugs too dangerous for legitimate clinical trials. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, who specialized in medical crimes, led the federal investigation. What you've uncovered is one of the largest illegal human experimentation cases we've ever seen, she told me. Dr. Reeves and his associates have violated every principle of medical ethics and federal law. The investigation revealed that pharmaceutical companies were paying doctors between $10,000 and $50,000 per patient enrolled in secret experiments. The patients never knew they were test subjects, and their families believed they were receiving standard cancer treatment. FBI raids on Dr. Reeves's laboratory and the pharmaceutical companies involved uncovered evidence of systematic human experimentation affecting over 200 patients across 15 hospitals. Many of these patients had died from experimental drugs rather than from their underlying diseases. Dr. Reeves was arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes, including murder, fraud, and conducting illegal human experiments. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The pharmaceutical companies involved faced criminal charges and civil lawsuits totaling billions of dollars. Several executives received prison sentences for their roles in the illegal experimentation network. Memorial Cancer Center implemented new protocols for monitoring all medications and treatments administered to patients, ensuring that experimental drugs could never again be given without proper approval and patient consent. Most importantly, the case led to federal legislation strengthening protections for patients in medical research and creating harsh penalties for anyone conducting human experiments without proper oversight and consent. 3 years later, I still work in oncology at Memorial Cancer Center, but everything about the job feels different. The trust that patients place in us feels more precious, knowing how easily it can be violated by someone who sees patients as research subjects rather than human beings. Maria Santos survived her ordeal and has been cancer-free for 2 years. "I almost died not from cancer, but from the person who was supposed to cure it," she said during Dr. Reeves's sentencing hearing. Mrs. Peterson's condition stabilized once Dr. Reeves's experimental drugs were discontinued, and she lived for another 18 months before her cancer finally progressed. Her family found comfort in knowing that her final months weren't shortened by illegal experimentation. Mr. Wilson recovered from the organ damage caused by Dr. Reeves's drugs and has been in remission for over a year. "I trusted my doctor to help me fight cancer," he testified. "Instead, he was slowly killing me with poison." The Dr. Reeves case became a landmark in medical ethics, studied in medical schools as an example of how research ambitions can corrupt the fundamental duty to first do no harm. For me, the case reinforced the importance of advocating for patients even when that advocacy challenges medical authority. The unmarked vials, the secretive treatments, the unexplained symptoms, all were warning signs that patients were being harmed rather than helped. Sometimes the most important nursing skill isn't administering medications or monitoring vital signs. Sometimes it's having the courage to question treatments that seem wrong and investigate when patients' symptoms don't match their supposed diagnoses. Because patients trust us with their lives, and that trust creates a sacred obligation to protect them from anyone who would exploit their vulnerability, even when that person is wearing a white coat and claiming to advance medical science. The difference between legitimate medical research and criminal experimentation isn't the sophistication of the drugs or the credentials of the researchers. It's the presence of informed consent, ethical oversight, and genuine concern for patient welfare above all other considerations. Dr. Reeves forgot that distinction, and his victims paid the price with their lives and health.